All right, everyone. Welcome to today's program. I apologize. I was trying to access my camera from my office and it didn't work, so I'm going to peek over Bridget's shoulder. My name is Brian Otten. I'm the marketing manager of the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce, and I welcome you to this program this morning. We appreciate you being here, and we certainly appreciate having Bridget available to conduct this program. On a personal level, Bridget and I just finished the first round of our transformational leadership session, which is the Chamber's new leadership program. Bridget was the facilitator and did a great job, learned a lot of great things over the span of the last number of months. It starts in September, wraps up each May, and we have that registration open on our site for the 2020-2021 session. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Bridget and let her take things away. Bridget has a very broad resume and background in terms of leadership training, and I think I'm interested to hear what she has to say today. So Bridget, it's all yours.
Thank you, Brian. So that is just such a great example of why we have to all adapt and change in this new world that we're living in, and really focus on the things that are important. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. One of the biggest challenges that I've seen companies do is, as we have begun to focus on things that are critical, sometimes the group and the team and those things are getting put on the back burner, and it's really never more important than it has been. So I am really excited to be here. I have been working with organizations to understand how to maximize their teams to get great results for more than 20 years. And although I've personally worked virtually pretty extensively with clients all over the country, many of us are just experiencing this for the very first time, especially as managers. So this is new territory for all of us, but it can be especially challenging for those individuals who are trying to motivate teams and achieve results that are more critical than they've ever been before. So how do we build culture and get great results in a virtual world? Well, whenever I face a new challenge that seems to have a lot of moving parts, one of the first steps towards understanding what my path might be forward is to always take a look at what do I know for sure. This is something I've used for many, many years for problem solving. So the very first thing is take a look at what do we know for sure. So we know that the way we've worked together has changed so much, so dramatically in the last 90 days. 90 days, it seems like forever. We also know that results are more important than ever as organizations are working to compete for shrinking market share, tough challenges with the supply chain, and we know an ever-changing and challenging economy. We have known for years that highly effective teams give us a competitive advantage, and that is just still true today. As a matter of fact, one could argue that the culture of teamwork has never been more important than it is right now. Finally, I think we can safely say that this virtual work world that we're looking at is not going away. I am certain that you've heard of the growing number of companies who have decided that all of their employees can work from home for the foreseeable future. So if you've been working from home, you know that there's some great pros and great cons to that, right? We've all kind of gone through, look what we just had happen, technical difficulties. We've done this 1,000 times, but that one time you need it to work, it isn't working. So as part of my business, I do executive coaching for more than 30 of our local local leaders here in central Wisconsin. And we've had many conversations over the past few years about how to do a remote workforce. Does it make sense? Well, none of us could have predicted the vast numbers of virtual workers that are necessary to get what we need to do done in our new reality. We certainly found a way to do it quickly. Now we have to find a way to do this well. We have to do it right. And as I began to think about these things, I realized that we can just use the tools that we already have at our disposal and just adapt those tools that we already know work. So how do we get from here to here? This all looks like a cozy virtual world happening, but I can guarantee you it's not all smiles. But let's get back to some basics and really take a look at how to get results from your team anyway. Building culture is not less important than it ever was, and great cultures begin with great teams. But what is a team? We can all have a lot of fun with a group of people, but that doesn't make them a team, because that doesn't guarantee results. Teams get results. That's the difference between an effective team versus just a random group of people that you happen to work with. So several years ago, I had the opportunity to train with Patrick Lencioni personally with him and become certified as an accredited facilitator for the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. I think his method of creating teams and highly effective teams is one of the best. So let's start with some basics on how to get results from your team.
Since we were little, we've been thrown on one team after another. Soccer teams, project teams, work teams, you name it. And even though we have lots of experience being on teams, the only advice we've ever been given about how to be a good teammate is to play nice and everything will work out. But what if it doesn't? What if people spend more time politicking and posturing? What if people can't agree on which direction to take, so they go nowhere? What if everyone is just looking out for themselves? Turns out there's more to good teamwork than just playing nice. That's where the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team comes in. Based on Patrick Lencioni's New York Times best-selling book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, this simple but powerful model consists of 5 behaviors that people can master to become a better teammate and to start building stronger teams. Here's Patrick to explain those behaviors.
There are 5 behaviors that all teams have to master to become true functional teams. The first is trust. Team members have to trust one another, which means they're vulnerable with one another. Vulnerability, which I think is one of the most important characteristics any human being can embrace in life, is nothing but admitting who you are as a person. It means they're capable of being completely honest and human with one another. That's important because it enables them to embrace the second behavior, which is conflict. Yes, conflict. When people are vulnerable and trustworthy with one another, they'll engage in conflict without fear. They'll debate issues, and they'll be totally upfront with one another. As a result of that, they'll be able to embrace the third behavior, which is commitment. They'll commit actively to decisions, and they'll leave the room on the same page, totally committed to follow through on what they've agreed to. That commitment will give them the courage to hold each other accountable, knowing that they're doing nothing but reminding each other about what they've intended to do from the beginning. And that accountability will ensure that they get results, that they're focused on the collective results of the team and not their individual needs.
So it starts with trust, it goes to conflict, commitment, accountability, and ultimately, results. That's it.
Now, ironically, it's not that complicated to build a team. It's pretty simple in theory, but it is hard because it requires a lot of work over time and a lot of courage. But it's worth it because the benefits of a great team are truly extraordinary.
And it all starts with you. Teams are made up of individuals after all, and every individual has a part to play in making them stronger and more cohesive. It's how we get back to those teams that were fun and fulfilling, and we couldn't wait to be a part of.
So what did you notice about that video? It's 100% true, but none of the teams on there were depicted as virtual teams. So how do we apply the theories from the 5 behaviors of the model and get great results from our virtual teams? I worked for several years for a company out of Waco, Texas, where they had 50 employees and 50 of my team members were all down in Waco, and I was sitting in the comfort of my home in central Wisconsin. I loved it. I had a lot of advantages. I liked being able to duck out of some of the drama, but I never really felt connected because they never really had to think about it. They kind of understood what I was going through, but I told them that, I said, try to conduct your entire meeting in the dark and see how people respond. Because that's kind of how I felt sometimes. I could see them, but very often I didn't know if they were hearing me or all of those challenges. And that was 5 or 6, 7 years ago. But now everybody's thinking about it. So whether the majority of our employees are working on site, in an office, or any combination of the two, it all begins with trust. Getting there can be a little tougher in the virtual world. But let's take a minute again and listen to Patrick to understand a little bit more about what trust in general is, and then we'll talk about bringing those concepts to our team in a virtual environment.
So let's go ahead and get started and talk about the first behavior that we have to master to make our teams great. And that behavior is trust. Now that sounds obvious, doesn't it? You're thinking, no duh. Is this really anything new? Well, the thing about trust that's important is most of us think about trust as what I call predictive trust, that we have to be able to predict one another's behaviors. Well, any group of people, any two people that have known each other for a long period of time will have predictive trust with one another. They'll be able to predict one another's behaviors. If I say something, you know that this is what I'm probably going to do. Or if you tell me that you're going to do something, I know what's actually going to happen. I can predict your behavior. That's not really trust when it comes to a team. The kind of trust that I'm talking about on a team is what I call vulnerability-based trust. Vulnerability-based trust is the kind of trust that comes about when human beings on a team can and will say things to one another like, I don't know the answer, I need help, I think I made a mistake, or even, I'm sorry, I think I did something that was wrong. When they can be completely vulnerable about who they are, mistakes and warts and all, it creates a dynamic on a team that is just invaluable. And we all know how powerful this can be if we think about teams we've been on that didn't have vulnerability-based trust. And we've all experienced that in our careers.
Vulnerability-based trust, that sounds horrible, doesn't it? Nobody wants to be vulnerable. But it really means something very different. It means being authentic. It means being open to the fact that sometimes we don't have it all together. And as I mentioned, I work with a lot of leaders, and I work with them through a company called Vistage, where we pull them together. I don't even want members to be in my Vistage group unless they're willing to be somewhat vulnerable, admitting that they don't have all the answers. So why wouldn't we want that from our teams? Why wouldn't we expect that from our leaders so that we can all work together in a more serious way? So we have all experienced teams that didn't have vulnerability-based trust. We can identify that by watching people posture for their position in the room or on a team. We can watch that with people who pretend they have all the answers. In a virtual world, we get kind of a rare peek into our team members' lives. We get to see their pets and their family members and their kids, sometimes their elderly parents they're working with. We get to see their homes, and more importantly, we get to understand what they come to work with and what they're carrying with them at work all the time. We just don't get a chance to see it. We are learning to understand what our team members have just always had in terms of challenges, and we get to understand who they are. It really forces us to be more vulnerable. So this is actually one of those good things that are coming out of what we're all experiencing right now. If we embrace that and we are patient with each other and we can create a safe space for our teams, I don't know about you, but I've been on more than one Zoom call where kids are popping in the way, in the background. People are looking off to the sides because they know they're dealing with the challenges that are coming at them, the interruptions. For me, I've worked out of my home for a long, long time. I love it. I don't necessarily love that everybody else is working out of my home now too, right? So I have some new office mates that I didn't have before. That, quite frankly, makes me more vulnerable, but it makes me more authentic. And rather than fighting that, embrace that. Be patient and accepting of those whole people that are coming with real families and real challenges, doing their very best for your company. Seeing others on your team in this way and allowing others to see that in you can really help build this vulnerability-based trust that we're talking about. So why don't we do that? What can you do personally to be more comfortable being vulnerable with your own teammates? And what can others do to make that easier for you? I'd like you to take a moment to think about these questions for yourself. These questions come from a profile called the 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team profile. And I'm really excited to announce, and I think you might have seen it in the advertisement, every person that's online and registered for this class is going to receive a link that they can take their very own 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Personal Development profile for free. So I'm providing that for everybody that's in this session. And what's cool about that profile is based on your particular answers to that profile, you can understand where you struggle with trust or accountability or conflict or all these things that we're going to be talking about today. So the profile is going to be individualized for you. Now, I'm going to show you some slides where I'm going to just ask you to think about it, which you'll be able to do on this call. But if you get that profile, you don't necessarily have to guess. You can kind of see one individualized for yourself. But just take a moment to think about why this might be difficult for other people on your team. What do you think is standing in their way to be more vulnerable and to build trust with you? Why don't we want to admit the mistakes? Well, we might not want to be a burden to other people. We might, I'll just figure it out myself. Why don't we want to admit our mistakes or ask team members to help us? Or one of my pet peeves is when someone says they're going to do something and they don't do it. Why don't they just come and tell me that they couldn't do it? And so we can kind of work that out together. We know that builds trust, but it's very, very challenging to do that. So what can you do to help others achieve better results on the team, regardless of what that is? So not wanting to be a burden, fear of disapproval, fear of loss of control, or not wanting to appear incompetent are all those things that might be standing in their way, just to name a few. So what do we do about it? Really, just having the discussion in a small group with your team can do that. And you can use the online chat rooms, the small groups. I will tell you, the rule of thumb is when you're having difficult discussions like this, the smaller a number of people in your individual discussion, the better. So if you have 12 people on the team, don't just throw this out to the whole 12 and say, hey, what's holding you back from being vulnerable? You'll just get crickets. But if you put them in small chat groups, I would say 2 or 3 to have the discussion with 2 or 3 people that maybe they trust. That will help. Now break those down you might want to break them down into small chat rooms for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then they can come back and talk about, hey, this is what I learned about trust and building trust and why this happens in our environment. And again, the cornerstone of trust is confidentiality. So if someone shares something with you in those small chats, make sure you explain to them that that's going to be completely confidential. And when people come back and do their reports, the report outs to the whole group can talk about the concepts, but they shouldn't talk about the personal challenges that each of the people have been having. So again, keep these chat rooms small, conversations small, and just making that effort to give them the opportunity to talk will go a long way in building that trust and helping people be more vulnerable. There's some other options. There's a reason why games build trust and why we use them in team building. Depending on what you have going on, sometimes they can be really fun, but there's some things you got to keep in mind to make them effective. So the reason why it works is because it's exactly this concept of being vulnerable in a safe environment. We wouldn't expect everybody to be good at whatever they're doing. There's climbing, there's physical things that you normally can do outside, those types of team building events. But online, there's so many things. We wouldn't expect everybody to be good at drawing or figuring out clues. And what this does is it puts everybody on an even playing force and playing space, and everybody on the same ground. So you're going to need, the leaders and managers just as much as the individual contributors to maybe accomplish a task, and they're all going to bring different skill sets. So there's some really great online games out there that you can use. You can even use these in your personal life. So over Easter, my daughter downloaded this goose chase game, and I was feeling a little bit like I didn't have a connection with my family over Easter, as I'm sure many of you may have felt that same way. I have 4 kids and they're all in different locations. Only my college student is home, but her boyfriend is in a different place, and my son's girlfriend is in a different place, and he's in a different place. And so we all connected virtually to play this goose chase game. And you can play it for free with up to 3 teams. Now, if you do it for team building and work, you have to pay for the bigger versions, but you can do a group of, you put 3 people, put 3 teams together, as many people on a team. Everybody downloads that app, and then my daughter put it together, who's of course in college, and she put out challenges that you can choose challenges from within the game, or you can make your own challenges. So they might be something like find a coin with 1989 on it. Well, that's a lot harder than you think, and everybody has the same chance of doing that on your team. So it's definitely an even playing field. It's definitely an element of luck, and just it's a lot of fun. Maybe there were some videos you had to do. It was snowing at Easter, so we had to go out and do a snow angel on Easter. You had to film somebody doing it. You upload those videos and those pictures proving that you did it, and then you get points. And at the end, you have this awesome video and pictures of your team's members doing all these fun things, which may be really fun at the Christmas party at the end of the year if we all get a chance to get together to play some of those back. So there's a lot of opportunities for things like that. A lot of teachers use Kahoot. There's things like Jeopardy. You can do you can do a lot of fun things. I've done Family Feud in person with important things you want people to understand about your organization. I did a Family Feud game for supervisors on what motivates their employees. It was amazing how little they knew about what really motivated their employees. But you can do that online as well. So there's a lot of really great stuff out there. Virtual happy hours. Now, I'm struggling with this a bit because you've got to really watch your culture on the virtual happy hours. You may have a person that can be perfectly fine going to a social event after work and meeting you there, but it's a very different story in their own home. Maybe they live with an alcoholic and they would never want to have alcohol in their homes and they don't want to participate. You have to be very, very careful about requiring people to do virtual happy hours. I don't recommend it. It's a fun thing if you know your team and you're really comfortable that it's going to work. Much more fun with family and friends. But that's something I would say definitely use a little bit of caveat. Final one I have on here is check-ins and updates. And what that is pretty much a meeting for your team that is just all about seeing how they're doing. There is nothing that is more powerful in building culture than caring about the people that you work with and showing them that do that and that you care. And there's nothing easier about showing people that you care. It's a question. You get everybody on, you leave about 2 hours. If you have a team of 8 to 10 people, hey, how are you doing? And what's happening in your world? What's working? What's not working? What can we do to help? Very easy, very open, no agenda, nothing you need from them, all about what you can do for them. So There are so many options there online, and this also could be one of those great things that this could result in, is we could take more time to build those virtual teams that we already have and bring them into the fold. So I can guarantee you, when I was working virtual, we never had a team meeting that was just about how we were doing and what we needed. So it could be a really great thing. So this next activity is something I do in person with this 5 behaviors training. When I go into companies, this is one that I think people are really surprised at its simplicity and its power. So it's a very simple activity where you basically say, where did you grow up? How many siblings do you have, and where do you fall in the sibling order, oldest, youngest, etc.? And what was an important or unique challenge of your childhood, of being a kid? Okay, so the most important thing, if you want to do this with your team, there's a couple of things that are really important. Before you begin, you just ask for confidentiality, because you want people to feel comfortable sharing these things with you. Number 2 is you don't play amateur psychologist, okay? We're not looking for the deep-seated curl up in the ball infant, formation about their childhood challenges. But we are giving them an opportunity. Now, you will see that potentially this can stir some emotion. So if you see that in your team, make sure that you appropriately redirect them to the help that they need. Because you'd be surprised at these questions when you start talking about some of these things, what happens? And finally, the most important thing is that you go first. So for example, when I facilitate this, I say, this is what I'm looking for. So the reason why you go first is not to make it all about you. It's actually to set the tone for what you're looking for in terms of vulnerability and what the expectation would be, and how are we connecting it to the world of work. So what I would say, where did I grow up? I grew up in a central Wisconsin town, very small, with about 1,000 people, called Manawa. And what's cool about actually saying the city is you'll find people will say, oh, I know somebody from Manawa. I used to live in Manawa. Not very many people did, but any of those connections, I lived in Cincinnati. I didn't realize we had those connections. So it's important that you say where you grew up, because you're building those connections with people that have something similar. Or I grew up in a small town, or I grew up in a big town, whatever. So then the second question is, how many siblings do you have, and where do you fall in the sibling order? Well, then I say, so I grew up in a central Wisconsin town in Manawa. I am the youngest of 16 children. Now, usually I personally stop and wait for the guests, because they always come. There's always a comment about the fact that growing up in a family of 16, it's a conversation stopper in some ways. So I have to just pause a minute. And then I usually make some joke about the fact that I apparently was designed to do team building from the time I was from birth, and that I've been working on trying to figure out how to deal with strong personalities for my entire life, something like that, to kind of make it light. And then the final thing is, what was an important or unique challenge of your childhood? And then I take a moment to just talk a little bit about, growing up as the youngest of that many kids, I always struggled with really feeling like I measured up to all my older brothers and sisters. And I think this is common with a lot of the youngest. And I think it's why we push ourselves so hard, because we never really feel like we're meeting the expectations for our own self and measuring up to what we would like to be for our brothers and sisters. So I talk about that. I talk about the challenge of sort of being in a situation where I've had to have a thick skin since I was a child. Well, thick skin is great, and it's not so great. And it impacts me at work, because sometimes this facade is not all honest about what's happening internally. And just that vulnerability, that little bit of vulnerability, if you're a leader, people will say, I get it. Maybe that's why they react a little bit strongly when I don't understand where that reaction is coming from. Or maybe I understand that why they constantly are pushing them and ultimately pushing us. I've heard everything in this particular, question from people. And I've heard things like, I was sexually assaulted as a child, and therefore I hate public speaking. I don't like any attention drawn to myself, because way back in the back of my mind, I feel like that's how that happened and it was my fault. Whoa. Imagine if you could learn some of these things in a safe environment with your team. The trick is the safe environment. So how do you do that? Don't crack any jokes. I'm a humor person. I like to crack jokes at appropriate time. This is not an appropriate time for jokes. You'll see them come up at this time, especially when people are uncomfortable with kind of where the conversation's going. A lot of times people who use humor to ease a challenging, vulnerable situation, which is fine in other people, but as the leader, you want to really understand the impact humor is making on this discussion. So if you don't feel comfortable doing this yourself, I mean, bring in an expert. I do this for companies all the time, but you can do it for yourself and with your own teams if you create a safe space, 100% confidentiality, and total respect for what people are sharing. It's very, very powerful activity. So a couple of other things really on creating that virtual safety. Predictive trust is important too. It's not just the vulnerability-based trust. We want to be people that say we're going to do what we're going to do. And some people really, based on their personality, need that more than others. So set those agendas, send them out prior to meetings. All the ground rules that you would want to do for your regular meetings are even more important in virtual. Don't let those slip aside. Establish some ground rules and codes of conduct. And if you have them already, change them for virtual because, and keep in mind, I don't really think it's a great idea to do a code of conduct that your kid should never show up, because that's unrealistic and it'll make people feel like they can't meet those. So, you might not bring your kid to work, but they might have to interrupt your meeting at home. Being on time, all those things. Have the discussion. Just ask, hey, let's redo our ground rules. Allow the people the time to chime in and learn to pause, because virtually we are going to have a greater chance of talking over, and you got to be a little bit more comfortable with silence so that you make sure people have a chance to talk. Understand the screen fatigue of a virtual meeting as well. In a regular meeting, I always make sure we get people up and moving every 90 minutes. But in a regular meeting, they can be shifting in their chairs, they can sit back, they can do all these things. They can sometimes go way back like this. And, in a regular meeting, that's great. In a virtual meeting, kind of usually sit up. We want to be centered. We want to be heard. But we spend all this time in a single spot. So 60 minutes max. Make sure that they're getting up. Let's just take a 3-minute stretch. Let's stand, get a glass of water, whatever that is. Virtual meetings should be about 75% shorter than in-person meetings, and keep less agenda items on the meetings and more purposeful meetings when you have them. And then quickly jump in if you're the leader, if things are going off track. You can watch. It's the best thing about virtual meetings as a leader or a facilitator of a meeting. You kind of watch. I mean, I literally have some meetings where I'll see people doing this. Now, in a regular meeting, they might be doing this under the table, but this is incredibly distracting, right? With a phone up there, I'm going to text somebody. So I kind of send them a little chat like, hey, your phone's, in the screen, pay attention, whatever. You can ask them a question, all kinds of things like that. The tricks we use as facilitators. So you're going to all do that to kind of create virtual safety. So don't forget the little things either. There's icebreakers are there for a reason. Icebreakers should be quick. They're there to kind of wake up your people and get to know your team. So an icebreaker it isn't just for people that don't know each other. It's a fun way to start a meeting and just say, hey, what's your rose and thorn for today? What's the best thing or the worst thing that happened to you today? What's the best thing or worst thing that happens or that is a result of working virtually? What do you love about it? What do you hate about it? Don't let people expand and do big stories. Just say, I want 15 seconds, best and worst. Critical thinking questions are kind of fun things that they can be riddles, like the first person to solve this riddle and throw it in the chat box, it kind of basically what you're doing is saying, hey, we're waking up your brain. You can use that what do you know for sure questions. Again, not to do a big, long, drawn out answer or discussion, but what do you know for sure? Well, I know for sure that I like working from home. I know for sure that I don't like the fact that everybody else works from home. And I know for sure that whatever that might be, quick, easy, fast, and then move on. The strength exercises is very powerful. And what that is at the end of your meeting, just say, hey, I want to give everybody an opportunity to just go around the team and give me one word that describes a strength in your team member. Wow, that's super powerful. And if you do that well, you can gather those strengths in those one words and put them in a Wordle, the things where you see all the words around their name, and send that to them. You can do virtual background games. Now, I personally don't love virtual backgrounds. Sometimes you see people go on and they have like things shooting out of their heads and they look like aliens, or they look like they're on the beach, but you don't really see them. I like seeing people where they are. And kind of what that background is, but we get it. Sometimes you need virtual backgrounds. But one fun virtual background game is on the way after a break, we want you to pop in with only a virtual background, and we want to guess whose virtual background they all are. So pick a picture, pick something. So that's kind of a fun little quick thing you can do to just have some fun with your team. And finally, the last one is if I could. That's just general, like a quick question. If I could be anywhere else today than here right now, what would that be? If I could trade any place with somebody else, who would that be and why? If I could go back and repeat any year of my life, which year would that be and why? Again, be quick and then just move on. So speaking of moving on, we're going to move on. So all these things build trust, but why is it important? We need to move from trust to building conflict, or building conflict to creating healthy conflict. Let's take a moment and listen to Patrick again to talk about that move to conflict.
Reason. You see, when we build trust on a team, it allows us to embrace the next thing that we have to do, and that is we have to really understand and benefit from conflict. Conflict is a second discipline or behavior that we have to embrace. Conflict on a team is a good thing, okay? Now, it looks different from culture to culture and company to company, and that's okay. The key is this. We're not talking about negative interpersonal conflict, mean-spirited. We're talking about productive ideological conflict, conflict around issues. That's a good thing on a team. What matters is this, that you know that nobody is holding back their opinions, that people are not afraid to speak up. They're not calculating the cost, weighing the political ramifications. They are, if something is worth disagreeing about, they will disagree, and they will tell one another. That's what we're looking for, that kind of conflict. Now, I said it's not supposed to be personal, and it's not supposed to be negative, but it's going to be uncomfortable. That's why I call it conflict. Some people say, well, can't you just call it discussion? The truth of the matter is, when human beings disagree, it's a little uncomfortable, and we have to embrace that, which is why we talked about trust first. Because if we trust one another, and we have to start there, and we have true vulnerability-based trust, then there's no fear. Because I know that if I disagree with you, you know that I'm not trying to hurt you. I'll admit if you convince me otherwise, so I can engage in this conflict without fear. But if there's no trust, if there's no vulnerability-based trust, then conflict becomes manipulation and politics. With trust, conflict is nothing but the pursuit of truth or the best possible answer. What a great thing that is. And that's why we need to embrace conflict on our teams.
But nobody likes conflict, right? Actually, that is not true. I would much rather be on a team that has healthy conflict than fake nice. Fake nice can ruin a team more than any type of conflict can. So I am going to, I spend so much time on trust, and you'll notice on the pyramid, it's the largest part. It almost always comes back to trust when you struggle with these other concepts. So we're going to move through the other concepts very quickly. Patrick Lencioni has some great videos on trust, and the next one is one of my favorites. I'm going to play this one, and then we'll talk more about conflict.
When it comes to conflict, there's this thing called the conflict continuum I like to use. I made up this simple construct. The conflict continuum is this. At one end is artificial harmony. This is where people on a team never engage in conflict. They're always nice to one another, even though they don't feel like it, but that's what they do. At the other end is what I call really awful, ugly, mean-spirited conflict. People are at each other's throats. Okay. So if this is the continuum, if you move down the continuum, you go a little more constructive conflict, a little more constructive conflict, a little more, a little more, a little more, and at some point it goes from constructive to destructive, and then a little more destructive, a little more until hell comes, right? And so most teams I work with live out here, close to artificial harmony. Like, oh, we don't want to have that. And it's because they think every time they move in this direction, it's one step closer to hell. Where in fact, the best place to be for a team is right here, where you're having all the constructive conflict possible and not stepping over the line. But we have to have the courage to go there. Well, why don't we want to go there? Because we're just afraid it's going to step over the line. And you know something? It is. The greatest teams in the world, occasionally, are going to step over the line. And when they do that, it's a moment of truth. It's an opportunity for them to recover from it, be vulnerable around it, and realize that they can survive that. And it gives them the courage to live right here. Teams that don't think that they can overcome that will stay way over here and never benefit from all of this wonderful constructive conflict. So we have to have the courage to go right up to that line and know that when we do step over it, we can recover. And when you recover from that, you build stronger teams. We know this in all of our personal relationships. When you recover from something like that, it only makes your team and your relationship stronger.
But how do we recover from that? It goes back again from trust. We go back, we admit our mistakes. If we don't handle conflict the way we should have, if we screwed up, we can recover by going back to all the concepts we already talked about trust. Now, one thing that's important, this is a little different than Crucial Conversations. Crucial Conversations is a great book. It's a great concept. There's some wonderful YouTube videos about crucial conversations. The difference is that's when you have to have a difficult conversation with somebody about something that you expected to go differently. Maybe their performance issues, could be a variety of things. That's really different than conflict, which is just a differing opinion of ideas. So one of the things you can do that's very easy in a virtual world is take a look at this conflict continua. You have we're talking about two different personality types here. Just a discussion around how different personalities show disagreement. You have your spirited debater on one side, and they typically, maybe talk a little faster. They might raise their voices. They're going to be a little bit more, probably look a little bit more passionate about the topic. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have your calm debater. Calm debaters are not going to, they're going to maybe be a little bit more reserved in their thoughts. They're going to think things through a little bit. And you're going to not always hear what they're thinking about a particular topic. It's going to maybe take them a little bit longer to be comfortable with expressing those ideas and thoughts, especially if they don't perceive there's trust there. So this is a great discussion on how you show disagreement. This again comes from that profile. And then here's another scale, receptive versus steadfast. Are they typically receptive and open to new ideas and new concepts? Or are they pretty steadfast where it would take a long time to convince them? Interestingly enough, a lot of spirited debaters can also fall on the receptive side. So they could be very passionate about one thing, but then be very open. If you convince them, they're going to be just as passionate to support your idea as their own. So these are two completely different scales, and you can fall on these scales very differently. Just because you're one doesn't mean that you're the other. And it's really important to understand that somebody that is a calm debater, it doesn't necessarily mean that they care less about the particular issue, even though they could be perceived that way. So a way that you can do this virtually, you can use your whiteboard on any platform that you have, throw these continuums up on your screen and let your team members put their initials there where they land. Now, if you want to just do it on your own without a profile, you can just have them do that. Say, hey, where do you think you land? And have the discussion. But the profile will actually share with you where after answering those questions, where you land on this continua. And then you can have those small group chat discussions about the consequences of your approach and what are the good and bad, because all of these things have good things and bad things about them. So the healthy conflict is one of the most challenging things to get beyond, but so critical to get to the next thing that we're talking about, and that is to get real commitment. So I'm going to take a minute, have you listen to Patrick again on how to get to commitment.
So why is conflict so important, though? Why is conflict so important? By the way, I'll have some leaders tell me, listen, Pat, I don't really care if people get their feelings hurt. What I don't want is to waste time. See, they'll say, it just takes too much time. Why should we debate this decision for the next 2 hours? After all, I've been in charge for a long time. I know what we should do. Why don't I just make the decision without engaging in conflict? And I'll save them 2 hours. I'll be their hero. They can go do email or something else. Well, the reason why that's a problem is because it takes us to the next thing that we have to overcome to make our teams great. We have to go from conflict to commitment. You see, the next thing we have to embrace is we have to get our teams to commit to decisions without reservation. And the only way to do that is with conflict. You see, if I make a decision for my team and they haven't weighed in on that decision, they're not going to buy into that decision. Let me repeat that. If people don't weigh in on a decision, they're not going to buy in. Now, that is not an argument for consensus, because I don't believe in consensus. I think that's a four-letter word. If we wait for consensus, if we wait until people all agree on a decision, we're going to make decisions that are too slow, too late, and probably equally dissatisfying for everyone. What I believe we have to do is have conflict so that people, when they weigh in, even if their idea didn't get adopted, they will buy in.
So what's the difference between clarity and buy-in, and how do you know whether people will weigh in or buy in or all that stuff? So what's the difference between clarity and buying in? Well, clarity is, does everyone understand the mission, the direction, the purpose, what we're all trying to do, and most importantly, the why? And there's all kinds of research on what the impact of really helping your team understand the why. That's a completely different session. But clarity is just understanding around that. So once we have clarity around the mission, the tasks, the responsibilities of everybody there, that's a big one. Who's doing what? If people don't have clarity on who's doing what at the end of the conversation, you can't get buy-in, because nobody knows what they're supposed to do and what their level of commitment should be. So once we have clarity, then we all must buy in. And it's like, wait a minute, I can't get my people to agree. And again, we're not talking about consensus. We're not talking about everybody's agreeing. We're talking about the opportunity to be part of a team, to be part of discussion, have the opportunity to weigh in on a scenario, and then agree that, okay, they didn't go with my best idea, but I'm going to support the team. That's the biggest challenge. So what does clarity look like in your organization? And in your organization, is your issue more clarity, or is it that people don't have the opportunity to weigh in, so they don't have an opportunity to buy in? So how can you do this in a virtual world? Well, there's a lot of different ways and fun tools. Actually, I think sometimes this is easier in the virtual world than in the real world. You can test for clarity using your polls on your app. You can do quick surveys to get a feel for what everybody's thinking. You can get real creative with your polls and prepare them in advance, or you can prepare them on the spot. You can use fun icons on your screen for agreement. Play around with these tools. You can use red, green, yellow for, are we ready to go? Stop, no way. All of that. You can do so many things. And then you can also chat, use the chat box for questions. Those questions can be personally directed, or to everyone on a team. I'd be careful about the personal chat box ones. Make sure people understand that they're using the chat box appropriately. And there's just so many ways to do clarity and buy-in. You can vote on the screen, right on differently, easier than in-person meetings, I think. So those are some great ways to do that virtually. But why might someone not want to seek clarity? Maybe or even, what might keep you from seeking clarity? I don't want to ask a question because I've asked that question. It's just a waste of time. People don't listen to me. People don't want to waste time. I don't want to take, kind of like in the video, I don't want to waste time fielding a lot of questions. They might be afraid of what the questions might be. And again, we're back at trust. So a strong personality can dominate a discussion and people can shut down. So really watch for that virtually. The best thing about being virtual is you can actually see their facial expressions closer and than you can sometimes in a regular room. So again, ask the questions to your team. What might be keeping them from buying in? What might keeping them from seeking the clarity that they need? So if they didn't feel heard, if they didn't feel it was their place, it's sometimes easier to let other people take the blame if things don't work out. Have you ever been part of a team that if you asked a question, you got assigned a new job or a new role because you asked the question? That's a huge issue with teams, and you don't want to do that virtually any more than you want to do that in person. So there's a lot of barriers to commitment, and it's just really important to understand what those barriers of commitment are. And again, go back. Did we have the healthy conflict? Do we have trust? The pyramid is designed so beautifully that you're going towards results, but the issues and the root causes are all in the bottom of the pyramid. Trust, conflict, and then commitment. And commitment gets it to us. Our next important thing, that gets us to accountability, because without accountability or without commitment, you can't have accountability. So let's watch the next one from Patrick.
And accountability is the hardest one for teams to embrace. In working with teams over the years, we found that this is by far the most difficult part of forming a team, is getting people on a team to hold one another accountable for what they've agreed to. Now notice what I said there, to hold one another accountable. I didn't say for the leader to hold people accountable. You see, the leader is not the primary source of accountability on a team. The leader is the ultimate source, but the primary, the most frequent source of accountability on a team needs to be teammates, peers. Peer pressure on a team is the best thing we've got going. That's where accountability lives. Somebody turning to one of their teammates and saying, hey, we committed to that. I thought you were going to do that. It doesn't look like you're living up to that. That's a beautiful thing. And you see, whether it's military or fire department or doctors in the emergency room, people don't go to their boss and tell on somebody. They confront one another directly because they know that's the way to get things done. And the very best teams very, very infrequently have to go to the leader and tell them about something. That just drags us into politics and delay. Great teams turn to one another and say, hey, listen, we trust each other. We've engaged in conflict. We committed to that. It would only make sense that I would confront you directly and say, what's going on? That is the most beautiful thing you can see on a team, is people holding each other accountable.
Accountability is one of those things that I think is a big challenge for all organizations. And I think what's interesting is everybody wants accountability until it's for them, right? We all want everybody to be held accountable, but that's been a big challenge. But if you do all these other things right, accountability is easier and just a part of the culture. And it's sometimes a lot easier from a peer. The big thing about accountability is you want to make the discussion you're having with your teammate about you and your thoughts alone. Sometimes if you go, hey, we were talking and we feel like you should have done this, that's how people feel ganged up on. They feel like, oh, you were talking about me, and then it's just, there's no trust. There goes the trust. So you want to embrace that accountability. So can you see that your team members hold each other accountable? That is the biggest challenge. So how do you get around that? Talk about what does accountability look like in your team and how they lack accountability. And you're going to do the same thing using those easy questions. Hey, how do you handle feedback? Let's take a minute to talk about it in our small groups. Take a look at, do they typically, how do they like to do it personally? So do they like to keep the pace of a meeting, or do they like to move on? Do they like to stop when we have questions? Have these discussions, and the same thing with the continua. You can have them chime in and then speak in these small groups. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of how you hold people accountable? So talk about a time when you've had had to hold a peer accountable. You can have all these discussions in your small groups. So there's some great ways that you can just have these very safe discussions online. So make sure that you keep these confidential, build, and always keep in mind that you're holding that trust and safety, so you don't have to go back and start from the beginning in culture, because we know that we can build this up and it can be very challenging to get it back. So finally, we're going to connect that accountability to results. And let's take one more moment and see how this connection happens. One more time with Patrick, and then we'll get to questions.
Why is it so important that we hold people accountable? It seems obvious, but there's actually a very practical reason, because when we hold people accountable, we enable ourselves to embrace the fifth and final behavior at the heart of building a great team, and that is the attention to results. If we hold people accountable, then we will do our very best to make sure that the organization, the team, is focused on the collective results of the team rather than their own individual results. See, that's the thing. People say, well, what would they pay attention to other than results? Well, they'll pay attention to their own results, their department, their career, their budget, their status. This happens all the time on teams. People say, I'm results focused for myself, not for the collective good of the team. The only way to make sure that it's the collective team results that matter most is if people know they're going to be held accountable for doing anything that runs counter to the good of the whole team. That's how accountability enables results.
We probably all know people that are more focused on their individual, and the key there is just to develop that shared fate. Live as a team, die as a team. That is the hardest thing, and probably I'm going to go forward to a question that I get asked a lot before we just jump in. I think we have just one or two questions in the chat box, but the hardest part is getting that feedback. In my transformational leadership class, I had them complete a checkpoint 360 that I've used for years, that I absolutely love, on the 8 competencies of leadership. And it was probably one of the most difficult things that they've had to do. And surprisingly, they don't, I had 40 people in these 2 different classes, and very few of them really understood how to get feedback. They just didn't get it from their managers. And we brought in a guest speaker to talk about that all feedback is good. And if you get that feedback and you get comfortable with that, you're going to build accountability, because people are going to be more comfortable with it. So that being said, I think we can move on to Q&A. So if it's okay, go ahead, Brian.
Sure. So we do have a few questions in the chat box, and if you have questions, you can add them there over the next few minutes. The first question is from Krista, and her question reads, how do you feel about expecting or asking everyone to weigh in? Is it okay to require that, or require attendance or response to polls, etc.? How do we respect their comfort level but get input as needed?
Yeah, I think you've got to figure out ways based on their personality that they might need to weigh in. Some people are going to be comfortable in a group to weigh in, and other people won't be comfortable until, it's kind of the meeting after the meeting, and we all know there's challenges with that. But you have to decide individual based on your team and what you're looking for. Giving people the opportunity to weigh in the way they want to is the most important thing. Even if they say, yeah, I'm good. I'm good, whatever you decide. Just make sure that they're being honest. And if you have a good culture of trust, you're going to know that. So I don't know if that's helpful, but really letting them weigh in the way they're comfortable with their own personality. And giving them the opportunity to weigh in and requiring a response are 2 completely different things. They have to know they have the opportunity to weigh in. There's no need to require everybody to weigh in. They just need to understand the consequences if they don't, which doesn't have to seem as dire as it sounds.
Great. Thanks, Bridget. Another question from Lisa. How do you have a team meeting virtually when you also have to cover phones, so you can't have the team removed altogether? In this case, the team is only about 3 people.
Well, that is tricky, and that's sort of an operational thing. Again, I think you discussed that with the people that operationally are making those sort of rules at work, whether that's a supervisor, whether that's a different department. I think you have to find a way to do that creatively, even if it's doing it a bit before a 15-minute huddle. There's a lot of people are doing 15-minute huddles prior to work, or over the lunch break or things like that. 15 minutes can actually gain you a tremendous amount if you do it every day. It's a struggle, I know, but that's an operational question that is different for everybody. But it's important.
We have another question from Julie asking about, and this is sort of related to virtual meeting etiquette. Do you have any additional resources or thoughts on virtual meeting expectations? Meaning, like you mentioned, people being on their cell phone or maybe not sitting up straight. Anything that could be shared with individuals in terms of some guidelines.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I could kind of research that for you and put that, give that to the chamber for distribution, if it's something that you're interested in. But again, I think it's really just finding a creative way to show people how they look online. There's some great resources on there, and I think there's some, I know I've Googled it, things like, before we started, this is a great example. When my computer is down on the table, I'm going to do this for you. I'm like this, and that's not a great thing. So we just took a couple books and get framed up right. For the person that's showing their phone, I just send them a little chat. It's all about building, giving people suggestions, just like how they are in the work world. I was in a meeting once, and the leader was like this. I mean, they were like this. And I text, you look like the home improvement guy, right? So we've all seen that. And if you have trust, you can share that feedback. If you don't be mean, right? So, hey, just want to let you know, you can see, your ridiculous whatever in the background, or, and again, if you have trust, that works. So, other questions?
Sure. Thanks, Bridget. Gary asked a question regarding the value of personality test profiles in terms of team dynamics. I guess what I would ask is, how do those personality profiles come into play, not just in terms of team dynamics as a whole, but how about in terms of virtual team meetings?
Yeah. So Gary, all biasness here, I've been selling personality assessments for more than 20 years and delivering them with, I think Brian said something about transformational leadership, that he was part of that program. And I think that all of my transformational leadership participants can attest to the value of really understanding and self-reflection of your others and giving people the opportunity to learn about each other. It's even more important in the virtual world, because people are going to struggle with different things, and based on your personality, that all comes out virtually. It just shows up a little bit differently. But I've got to say, if your team does not have some kind of way to put those thoughts in written format, like a personality profile, it's just an easy way to really help understand each other and get some self-reflection. So you can chat with me offline about that, but I could go on for a long, long time, a whole nother hour, about the importance of personality assessments, virtually or in person. So.
Great. We have just a couple of questions. We're a little bit over on time, but I guess we'll get these in. Jerry asks, how do you address the one person in a group who is doing all the talking? Their input may be welcome, but it sort of stifles participation by other people.
Yeah, I think that's another one where if you have a tool that says, hey, these are the advantages of people that do all the talking, and these are the pros and the cons, and make it so more of a strength and weakness. And it's not how they are as people that is good or bad. It's where is it effective, where it's not, where it's not effective. You want those people to do all the talking when they're going to speak for a group when nobody else wants to. But it's also very, very destructive And again, it goes back to same thing we've been talking about, building that trusting environment that you can have a real conversation with them about the damage that they're doing in that environment. And most of the time when people that are doing all the talking, they really want either, that attention that they're not getting, or they're looking for results and they're not getting the results. So they're talking through that. So if you can show them how talking over other people does not get them the results that they want, that will go in and see what motivates them. So very, very helpful to understand that.
Absolutely. And you mentioned transformational leadership and the assessments that are given in that program, and I can personally attest to the fact that there's a lot of value in those. Even though, as someone who I think knows myself pretty well, almost all the assessments, I think all of them, had sort of a breakdown of how you interact with people of other personalities, how those people see you under certain situations, and so those are some really valuable pieces to that program. We have one final question from Robert, and he asks about his meetings are voice only, so they're not video conferences, they are voice only meetings. Any insight on the advantages or disadvantages of having meetings like that where it's just voice, no video?
Most often I find that some people are, excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze, which is like where I might shut my video off. So most people, a lot of times with the video, they might not have the internet demand or the Wi-Fi capabilities to do that. If you have a lot of people in a group, it's better if you shut off the video part, because sometimes the audio is easier to hear. So depending upon the size of your meetings, that might be great. Personally, even one-to-one, I know I can call people. So I do executive coaching one-to-one. And I know that I can pick up the phone and call and have a conversation with any of these people and do my executive coaching sessions over the phone if I have to. But seeing them in person is always best. Connecting physically with people it's the next best thing. I would say video if you can possibly get it. If not, I think not having video is the second option. So those are the advantages, disadvantages. Just
Great.
Make sure you're keeping the people included that don't have video as well, and don't forget about them if they're on the line. So, and we talked about profiles. So you will get a free 5 behaviors profile in your email. It's yours. There's no pressure to go buy more. I will follow up and give you a kind of chat with you a little bit about your own personal one, and if you like it, I like to have the opportunity to get these out there. They're so valuable.
Great. Thanks, Bridget. Well, that'll conclude the program for today. I want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank Bridget for presenting. This was a fantastic opportunity to add some knowledge and skills for each of us that were on board. And this program will be recorded and posted to the Chamber's YouTube channel. I want to, again, thank everyone. This program was part of our Ready, Let's Grow campaign. Hopefully you've seen the ads on TV and heard them on the radio. You can visit readyletsgrow.com for additional resources related to this world that we're living in, impacted by COVID-19. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.